Welcome back to episode 4 of Faraday Tech Cafe. I am your host, Gwendolyn Faraday, and in this podcast, we bring you interesting stories, information about new technologies, and fresh perspectives from around the development community. In this episode, I interview the Jared Wilcurt, a senior software engineer currently working at Worldwide Technologies. Jared is a prolific creator of open source projects using cross-platform desktop app and web technologies like Sass, Vue.js, and NW.js, and very involved with giving talks and workshops in the community on the topics of code and productivity. In this episode, we talk about 2 of his most popular talks: how to finish the projects that you start, and crafting the perfect developer resume. Hi Jared, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Hey Gwen, happy to be here.
Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi, I am the Jared Wilcurt. I am a senior software engineer. I've worked for a couple of large tech companies like Worldwide Technology and Salesforce. Outside of work, I do a lot of open source projects. I've got a couple hundred under my belt at this point. A few large scale ones that have been downloaded, close to 500,000 times that are fairly popular. And I'm also pretty heavily involved in the tech community. So I do a lot of stuff with different meetup groups. I actually helped run the Vue.js Indie and the Free Code Camp Indie meetup groups here in Indianapolis. And so that's kind of my brief intro.
Awesome. So what led you to become a software engineer in the first place?
I started off doing design work and slowly transitioned from design to IT work, and then from IT into development. The motivation for that came from wanting to be able to build things. I had these ideas for projects where I'd say I want to build this thing out, but I didn't have the programming skills. And so learning to code was a means to learn the skills that allowed me to create these ideas that I'd have and actually, see them to fruition. And then fortunately, I had some friends that were programmers who could kind of guide me and help me when I would get stuck on stuff, which was very useful. And then started to get pretty good at it after a while and wanted to start helping other people. So that's kind of how I transitioned over from a design background into engineering and software development.
Interesting. So you actually had a background in design, and then you got into development because you wanted to be able to build things. So what made you want to pursue it as a career?
Yeah, there's a lot of craft to software development that appeals to me. And it's a really stable, well-paying market where it's easy to find work and work with a team of people who are passionate about what they're doing and skilled and interested in not just coming in, doing the job and leaving, but really care about what they're working on and who's going to end up using the end product. That's a really nice benefit of this industry, of being able to work with people like that.
So basically, you really enjoy working with the craftspeople in the software industry. So real quick, does that background in design that you have help you with being a developer in your day-to-day job?
Yes and no. So there's definitely aspects of it that are really useful, particularly from a front-end development perspective. There's certain times where having an understanding of visual layout and the composition of things and how someone parses the information on a page and how they visually read it, where that's useful and being able to improve the design of something, or just a basic understanding of color theory. There's a lot of things in design that transfer over to front-end web development. It's an entirely different skill set as well. So like, most of my day-to-day work is actually just figuring out the logic of things and hooking up the plumbing to make network requests and handle error states, that kind of stuff, where the design skills, if you don't have those, it doesn't matter. You need the engineering skills for that aspect. It does come in really handy from a communication perspective whenever you need to talk to a designer. Being able to understand that language and be able to communicate in their language so that they understand better what you're trying to get out of something. That's always useful, having that cross-discipline idea for anything, being able to communicate better with others on a team that specialize in that area. So yes and no, it's useful in certain areas, but mainly it's great for being able to communicate to others that are doing that effort. Or if you don't have anyone to do that design level work, you have at least a base level that you can fall back on and work with.
Right, that makes sense. Communication is always really important. So I want to talk about your projects. You've given a lot of talks over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, and one of your most requested talks was on the topic of finishing the projects that you start. Now, at this point, in the last 4 years, I believe, you've finished over 200 projects, which is extremely impressive. How did you accomplish that?
Yeah, I'll start off by telling kind of a quick story as to how I started to figure some of the stuff out so I could get better at actually finishing projects. I used to be, like most people, really bad at finishing the projects I'd start. I'd come up with a cool idea and I'd start working on a thing, and then I'd get a week or two into a project and then have this other cool idea, and the project I was working on wasn't fun to work on anymore, so I'd stop working on it and switch over to a new project and just keep doing this. This cycle would keep happening. I think that's a really common thing with most people. So I started on one of my earliest coding projects, which I knew when I started on it was going to take a long time to finish. So I knew going in that it was going to be a large project. And I had some pretty rigid ideas around how I was going to approach this project. And I got 6 months in and a lot of it was done, but I found that the approach I was taking just wasn't going to work. And I had to switch to some other approach. So I made some concessions, but I still tried to stick to this rigid idea and worked on it again for another 3 months, dedicating just this one project. And then realized I had to scrap a lot of that and take a third approach, a lot less rigid, but one that I would still be happy with. And then after another 3 months, so 9 months total, I had finished up this project. It took around 9 to 12 months, so almost a year, working on one project to get it completely done and finished. And in that time, I learned a lot of stuff about seeing a project to completion. One of those ideas was actually focus on just one project and don't switch over to anything else. And when you do that, it forces you to really prioritize. So you come up with this other really cool idea of a project you want to work on, and you have to set that off to the side and say, when I'm done with this, then I'll go to the other project. And you may have a lot of cool ideas while you're working on trying to finish one project up. So you have to kind of put them all in a line and say, okay, what's the next thing I'm going to work on, and prioritize what projects you are really the most passionate about. And that forces your projects to have to be better and have to kind of compete with each other to deserve the time to actually get worked on. So that's one of the things I learned from it. And another was this idea that there's different types of projects and you should treat them differently. And when your whole goal is just to get something done, then you end up finding that there are aspects of how you approach a project that make it a higher risk that you won't actually finish it. For example, if you are going to bring in a new technology that you haven't worked with before, there's a risk that you won't be able to use that technology to actually finish this project. Or maybe it's not a good technology, or maybe it's too difficult to learn right now. So from that approach, you should really just use the tools that you're already familiar with and limit or prevent the adoption of new technologies that you're not familiar with in a project. Now, that isn't to say you shouldn't learn new technologies or you shouldn't have projects using them. It's just that you should separate those off into their own little projects where your whole goal is just to learn that new technology. And so I've kind of named these different types of projects as an academic project, which is one where you would just focus on learning something new and that's all you care about. A passion project, which is one where you're really passionate about this thing and you're willing to spend a lot of time on it to get it done. And, your whole goal is just to get that thing finished. And then kind of an in-between, which would be a resume project, which is something where you want to time box it to a short amount of time. And your goal is really to impress somebody. And I found that every type of project I can think of in the last 5 or 6 years has fallen into one of these three categories. Either I'm trying to impress someone, or I'm trying to learn something new, or I'm trying to build something I care about. And everything falls into one of those categories. There may be others, but I've not found anything that didn't fit into those. And so I kind of take different approaches around what is allowed to be done on that type of project and what isn't allowed to be done. On a academic project, my goal is to learn something new. It's not to make anything cool. It's not to impress anyone. It's not to, work on some amazing idea I have. It's just to learn something new. So if I have some cool ideas, I shouldn't waste it on an academic project. I should get in and get out as fast as possible. I should spend as little time possible on my academic projects. Just get in and learn what I need to learn so I can then get back to actually building the stuff I care about. So I don't want to waste any of my good ideas on those. And I really need to treat every academic project as being completely disposable so that there isn't any cool stuff going on. I'm not going to show this off to anyone. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I just want to build something quickly so that I can learn it. And it doesn't matter if I finish it or not. As long as I learned what I was setting out to learn, then that project is finished and I can throw it away. It's done. It's disposable. And then I can get back to the projects I really care about and then take what I learned from there and maybe adopt it or maybe not, depending on what the outcome was. So yeah, there's different approaches for each of these types of projects. And when you look at it from that perspective, then that allows you to have these short one-day projects where all you're doing is just trying to learn something new. And maybe that's only a 5-minute project, right? I make a new folder on my desktop, I download some new technology, I play around with it for 5 minutes, and I say, okay, I see what this does, I understand how to use it. I don't really have a good use for it right now, but I'm familiar enough with it now that I know what it is. If I end up maybe needing this in the future, I'll know more about it and I can go and do a bigger project and then throw that folder away, whatever it was. That's a quick little 5-minute project. But then there's also stuff where you need to say, okay, I'm going to work on this and it's going to take me a month to build this out before I'll be done. And then you kind of have to section out that project into different phases so that you can actually have these checkpoints to know, like, this is how far I've gotten and I can stop here and it's technically done. So I can talk a little bit more about that if you like, about the different phases of projects.
Sure. So let me just make sure I understand the breakdown. So you're saying it's important to kind of collect all of our projects or maybe make a list of them. Because I know as a developer and creator myself, I know I have so many different project ideas and things that I want to build and different apps on my bucket list. And what you're saying is to write them all down and then categorize them into basically the 3 categories you mentioned: academic or passion or resume projects. Once you list and categorize them, how do you kind of partition your time or decide which ones to do first?
It's all up to you. So whatever makes the most sense to you. Like, there's a lot of things to take into account when it comes to prioritizing things. But, ultimately it comes down to, I have these 3 projects that I want to build. I want to make all 3 of these, and maybe in the future I will have completed all 3 of them, or maybe only 2 of them, or maybe 1. But I need to look at those 3 and say, which one of these am I most interested in working on? And understand the reasoning, whatever the criteria is for you. Maybe there's this company in town that uses this technology and I want to learn that technology because I want to work there one day. Well, then this project to learn that technology, maybe that's going to be higher on that list. Or maybe you just have a few really cool ideas that you want to do and you just have to rank them as which one's the coolest idea and then start from there. But I think forcing yourself to just focus on one project at a time and to not abandon it and switch to another one, that's the real important way of actually getting something done, is to ensure that you actually pick a project and you work on it and you don't switch to something else until you're actually finished. And to limit those risk factors like technologies or skills that you don't have. And this isn't just for coding. You can do this from really any kind of project. For example, I want to make a movie, right? I want to make a full-length horror film. and it's about a serial killer, and I have this idea, this gimmick where you never see the serial killer. You only see him through his vision, and his vision is always warped because, he's got a warped mind or whatever, right? This is real deep. And so for that, I want to use a fisheye lens in my movie. I've never used a fisheye lens before. I have no idea if that will work well or not. I've never made a whole full-length movie before. I don't know if that will work or not. I don't have the budget to do that. So from a academic project, I would just go and procure a fisheye lens, borrow one, rent one, buy one, and then film some basic stuff. I would just film a stationary scene in my dining room table with, a bowl of fruit and a flower or something, and see what does a fisheye lens look like in this indoor light setting? What does it look like in outdoor settings, low light settings? What about action scenes? If I do handheld camera, I'm running around, or like I'm chasing my cat up and down the stairs, what does that look like? Am I making a interesting storyline? Is the plot cool in this? No, I'm just filming at different lighting levels. I'm filming at different depths of field and just recording all of those. And then going back and looking at the footage later and learning from this process and saying, okay, it turns out fisheye lens doesn't work well when you're running really fast. It doesn't work well in low light settings. It works really well in these areas though. And so you learn from that process. And then when I'm done, anything from that I don't need anymore, I'll just throw away. I'll delete the clips I don't care about. Maybe I'll keep some of those clips around to reference later on, so I know, like, okay, what was the depth of field that looked really good? Okay, cool. I have that reference footage there. And that's a good short project that can be done in a day or so, and you've figured that process out. And then maybe I want to make a short film that kind of just teases this idea and hire in some local actors or maybe some friends of mine to do it, and just do like a 10, 12-minute movie that kind of explores this idea with the purposes of taking that to a movie studio and pitching it to them and saying, here's a teaser for what I want to build, here's the idea around it, and use the knowledge that I gained from the academic project in that short film. But I want to scope it so that it's really short in length. It doesn't have to be the full idea. It just has to get the idea across to someone. And then from there, maybe I can get some funding for it, or maybe the studios don't like it and I take it to Kickstarter or whatever, right? And then with money, I could make a full-length film and hire in real actors and not just my friends. And then that movie, that full-length film, that would be my passion project, where it's going to take, maybe a year to actually really build that movie out and film everything and go to all the locations and write out the script and do all the editing and get it ready for production and have the trailer built and the website for it made up and all that. That's an example. Another thing would be maybe cleaning your house, where an academic project would be trying out different types of cleaning tools and seeing, the different types of Windows cleaners and which one works best or whatever. That would be the academic one. And then a resume project where you're trying to impress someone. Maybe you're a college student and your parents are coming up to visit your dorm and you just need to clean it up really fast for them. Or maybe, you've got a girl that you're dating and she's going to come over to your apartment and you want to clean it up a lot. So you move all of the crap over into one room that she won't go into, and you just get enough of the apartment clean so that you don't look like a mess. And then you have a real passion project, which is like, okay, I have a garage full of stuff and I need to go through and get rid of most of the stuff in my garage and do the whole thing. And it's going to take me a week to clean this thing out, or maybe longer. So like this works on any type of project, not just coding stuff. It works for anything. If you take that idea, those approaches where all of the stuff that could get in the way of finishing your project, you separate that stuff out and you just focus on what is the bare minimum that you can do to get the thing actually done so you can move on to your next project.
Okay, so what I think you're talking about is kind of boiling things down to where you're working on one project at a time and you're keeping this MVP or minimum viable product mindset, where what can you get done in the least amount of time and then build off of that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. And from that, I've finished hundreds of projects over the course of a couple of years. There's also like something to be said about take breaks and like don't just be a workaholic. But like still, if you take these approaches, you can still get a lot of stuff done a lot more effectively and with better end products. But when it comes to like those bigger passion projects, they're kind of a different beast than the other ones. Because like a resume project, the name comes from you want to get a job at a place. And so you want to make a project that will impress that place. So you're going to use the technologies that they use. That's kind of where that idea comes from, the name resume project. And for that, you really need to scope your project down so that you can get it done in 1 to 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks of working on it and a third week of just polishing it. And like, that's really time boxed, and it doesn't need to be the full idea. It doesn't need to be fully functional. It just needs to look done and look really pretty and have a cool idea, something novel. From a coding perspective, for those who are trying to get into the industry, like if you show me that you can do a tic-tac-toe game or a Frogger clone or a Pomodoro clock or whatever, that's nice. That shows me you can follow a tutorial, but I want to see like something interesting. I want to see something I haven't seen before, because I've seen those a million times. So, come up with a cool idea of this is a anonymous chat room where every person's chat name is just a random animal. And, when you load the page, you get a different animal assigned to you. And if you post a link to an image, everyone sees the image all at once. It's like an anonymous image sharing chat room. Okay, that's weird. I've never seen that before. That's an interesting idea. Or this is an app that combines YouTube and maps. So you can see on the map where a video was recorded near you, and you can watch that video and you can reply to it. You can make your own video and have it pinned to the map. So you can only watch these videos if you're within range of where they were recorded. That's an interesting idea to get people out to different places. Lots of different cool ideas that you can do from that. And you don't need a fully scalable, envisioned version of it. You just need something that kind of works, a proof of concept, a prototype, but make it look nice so it's nice and polished. And, maybe use one new technology in a resume project, as long as it's something that the people you're trying to impress would actually care about. I hear you guys use this technology, so I wanted to learn that because I want to work here. So I used it in this cool novel idea project. So I think that's a different beast on its own, that resume project, where it's a lot more time boxed and limited in scope, versus a passion project, which could go for the rest of your life. And how do you know when your passion project is done? Because nothing's ever really done. You can always improve something. So for that, I kind of scope things into different phases. When you have a passion project that you want to work on, or if you're just trying to pick which of these projects you want to devote yourself to and ignore the rest for now, a good practice to do is go through and just write down every single idea that you can come up with for that project. And from that, you can then start to organize them. So every single idea you can possibly come up with, you organize those into 3 different groups or 3 different buckets for those. And I like to call those buckets need to have, want to have, and nice to have. So the need to have is like the bare minimum. Like if this feature isn't there, like it just doesn't work. Whatever you're going to call this project, it can't be that thing without that feature. The want to have is like, yeah, but like I actually want it to have these other things. Like this is what I really want it to be. And then the nice to have is like, here's all these other really cool things. They'd be nice to have on there. They're not really like central and core to what it is, or like something that I really, really want to be a part of it. It's just like, if I kept working on this, here's some other things I could add to it to improve it in the long term. So that like need to have section, I think needs to be as small as possible. So you should be able to go through that list, and anything in that list that you can shift down to the want to have, you kind of have to do that. You should be doing that for your first version that you're going to try to make of whatever you're building out. That can be tough to kind of understand that. There's a lot of good examples online, what an MVP really should look like. Mario is something that everybody's kind of familiar with. Everyone knows Super Mario. So the MVP for Mario would be a little square that's moving back and forth, because you don't actually need the art for Mario. You can just have a little red cube, little red square that moves back and forth and runs around. And do you need Goombas, little mushrooms that you jump on top of, the enemies? You don't really need that necessarily, or the Koopas, the little turtles. You don't need those either. What about power-ups? No, I don't need that. That doesn't, power-ups aren't in the game. They don't matter. That's fine. I can remove those. What about pipes? No, I don't need pipes. So really I just need a little square. What about jumping? Yeah, you kind of need jumping. If you don't have jumping, it's not really a Mario game. So that's kind of the approach of like, what can you get rid of and still technically be your project? And if you scale it all the way down to that and it's just a little red cube that runs and jumps, and maybe you have a hole that it can jump over and maybe fall in and die and respawn at the beginning, and that's all you have, and you can make that fun, then you've got something, right? So then you can say, okay, now I'm going to start adding enemies. And you come up with a big list of all these great enemies, and you can prioritize the ones you want to start working on, and then maybe not all of them get in the game. And maybe you could start saying, okay, what power-ups do I want? I want to make them, I want to have the fire flower, I want the star, so I can have invulnerability, and so on. So you come up with all these ideas of these power-ups, and then you can start implementing those features and, designing the levels and so on. So that's kind of the approach for the MVP of like, get the bare minimum in there so it's functioning and it's working. Yeah, so that's kind of the idea there for the MVP, is that you get just the bare minimum. It's not really what you want out of the game. What you want is to have cool artwork of Mario running around and jumping on the Koopas and, getting to the flagpole. But first you have to get that MVP done. And then the next phase would be actually not to do the stuff you want to do. That's actually phase 3. I put something else at phase 2, and that's what I call supplemental work. Anything additional that your project needs. Like, for example, maybe you need to do documentation if people are going to be using it, or if you're not making a website, does the thing that you're making need a website? Or back to that movie analogy, I'm going to make this movie, this full-length film. I want to have a website for it. I need to build a trailer for the movie. I need to, get marketing in place for the poster and all of that stuff. So that's all the supplemental work that isn't the project itself. It's all the extra work that kind of surfaces around your project. And I put that at phase 2 because when I get my MVP done, I immediately want to start working on adding all of these new features, right? I want to get it to the stage of what I really want, right? I'm really motivated to start work on that immediately because that's the cool part. That's the part that people want to do on a project. But if you force yourself to look at the supplemental work first, well, then that means that you need to, sometimes you'll look at that and be like, no, I don't want to make the website for this. I just want to add these features. And you really need to ask yourself then, well, if it's not worth your time to do the supplemental work, why is it worth your time to keep adding these features to it, right? Because the project's not going to be done until that supplemental work is also finished. So if that's not worth your time, maybe you're done with this project and you need to move on to something else where it actually is worth your time to really finish it. That's why I like to have that at step 2, because it really forces you to evaluate where you're at. And while you're working on that supplemental thing, you can have other people look at that ugly baby that you made, that MVP, that ugly Mario game. Other people can start trying it out and giving you feedback on it. And maybe that helps you come up with new ideas for the features that you should be working on, or reprioritize what you'd be working on. So that's a good time to get feedback, and you can still be working on that supplemental stuff in the meantime. That's kind of the reasoning behind that. And then you can do once your supplemental work is done, you've got your MVP, you've got your website basically fleshed out, and the marketing and, whatever the documentation, whatever your project is, whatever the extra stuff is that kind of surfaces around it, that other work, that's pretty much done. Then you can go back to adding all the cool stuff and improving it. And what's nice about this is at any point you can cut off your work and you can say, okay, I've got these extra, you've got a whole list of stuff that you want to add to it, right? And then a bunch of stuff that's nice to have. And at any point you can just say, okay, I'm done with this. Like I'm going to say, this is the version that I got up to, and these are the features that are done. And I have a bunch of other things. I could come back to this in the future and work on it more. But you can kind of like trim the tail and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to work on a different project. And you finished it. Like you're done. Like that was it. You finished the project. Because again, no project is ever truly finished, but it's not at a half done state. It is finished. You got every new feature you add. Once that feature is finished, that's a new done version of the project. So you can always cut it off at any point and move on to somewhere else. And then if you do get through all of your want to have, and then you get through all of your nice to have, at that point, you're just doing maintenance. Like if it's a software project, particularly, because I've got several large projects that are used by a lot of people where the project's done and now I'm just maintaining it, and I'll do a release like once a year of just updating the dependencies or doing some small bug fixes or something. And that's kind of your phase 5. So you've got MVP, supplemental, want to have, nice to have. Phase 5 is just maintenance. And then phase 6 is what I call Phoenix, where phase 6 is either your project no longer needs to exist, so you don't need to maintain it anymore. You need to deprecate it and say that this is done, the project is dead, I'm no longer going to work on this ever again. And that happens sometimes, like if you create a project that solves a problem and then that problem doesn't exist anymore in the future. We've gone beyond that, and we have much easier ways of doing stuff, and whatever problem you were solving doesn't need to be solved anymore. Then cool, your project's done, deprecate it, phase 6, you're done, you put it into retirement. Or you get to phase 6 and you realize this problem does still exist, or I do want to keep working on this thing. And then you do the Phoenix, which is where you burn it all down and you start over. You've been working on this for several years maybe, and your skill sets have improved a ton, and now you want to just go through and you still want to maintain this project, you just want to rewrite the whole thing. And we see this a lot. Sass is a large-scale project that is used by most of the front-end web community for styling their CSS. And it was around for many years. It was written in Ruby, and then the maintainer of it said, hey, this is cool. I'm still going to keep maintaining this for many more years, but I want to rewrite the whole thing in Dart. And so he did. He rewrote the whole thing. And so that happens. That's kind of that Phoenix point where, you start again. That's kind of the phases that I see for those big passion projects, the life cycle of one of those.
Awesome. And that was a really good Mario example, by the way. So there's quite a few steps that need to be broken down, and I feel like they need to be tracked between planning and making the MVP and, like you said, supplemental work and then everything else. So do you have any recommendations for systems or tools that can help people kind of in the whole process from starting a project to finishing and keeping everything organized?
Yeah, so this is a very context-sensitive question. So it depends on a lot of factors. Is this a tiny one-day project? Is this a resume project? Is this a passion project? How many people are working on it? What kind of project is it? Is it a software development project, or is it something else? So there's a lot of different variables there to take into account. Small projects, I may not do any organization at all. Like an academic project, here's the stuff I want to learn. I'm just going to hop in, hop out, and there's no organization. There's no criteria. It's just, I want to learn these things. I'm going to go in. When I've learned that, I'm done. So no organization, no planning at all. And then the next level up from that would be, this is a short project, maybe a couple days, maybe a week or two, no more than a month. And on those cases, then I'll probably just have a text file and just write everything out in a text file and keep it in the project. If it's a repository for code, then I'll just put that in the README and I'll have a checklist basically of all of the stuff I'm trying to get done. And I think that's fine. That's all you need. But then on like bigger projects, then, or, especially if you're going to be working with other people, then it's really useful to have a system where that is kept separate from the code base itself. For actual code, then there's different project management systems that are just built into GitHub or GitLab or whatever. They'll have their own little projects page and they'll have issues. And issues are a really easy way of handling this on coding projects. You create a GitHub issue, you flesh out roughly the stuff you want to get done. You can flesh it out more if needed, and then listing all of those. And then you can use the projects page on GitHub to kind of organize the different phases and then put each of those issues into those phases and track what's in progress right now and prioritize which things should be worked on next. And that's really useful. That's very similar to a Trello-like system where you have a bunch of cards that can be fleshed out that have information, and you can have multiple people tracking those cards as you move them across from in progress to in review to complete it or whatever. And I feel like if you're not doing a coding project, then something like Trello works pretty well. Personally, I'm a big fan of Clubhouse. Clubhouse is a website that does project management. It gives you a lot more power and control than what you would get out of something like Trello, but it's still very easy to use. So you don't have that same burden as a project management system like Jira, for example, where you literally need to hire a Jira admin to like run the thing and keep it up to date. And it has a lot of complexity and offers a ton of features that you probably aren't going to use in most projects. But if you've got a large enterprise company and you have thousands of employees, then maybe Jira is the correct solution for you. But for most projects, I try to avoid paperwork. I try to avoid adding in extra layers of effort that are required to just doing the project management aspect. There is a bare minimum that you need to meet, with the exception of the one where it's a 5-minute project where there is no project management. But, the bare minimum of each project of like, I need a list of work that needs to get done so I can organize that list and prioritize what needs to get done. So like there's a bare minimum, and depending on the size of your project and how many people are working on it, that should justify the additional cost to tooling, the additional effort required for the tooling to keep track of that work. But in general, I try to keep that as streamlined as possible, so that my focus is on actually getting stuff done, not on organizing the best possible project that could ever be that will never actually get worked on.
So you talked a lot about these resume projects, and I know there are a lot of new or aspiring developers who watch my content. So I want to ask you about another popular talk that you give concerning portfolios and resumes for people who are learning to code. So first of all, what are the main things you are looking for when you're reviewing a developer's resume?
I want to see a listing of technologies and skill sets. So I want to see that up front, to see what do they have experience with, and see, for the job that they're applying for, is that relevant? And really that's mainly what I'm looking for through the entire resume, is just relevancy. So there shouldn't be anything on the resume that isn't relevant. If you're very new and you don't have any relevant job work, that's okay. Like, put your job work on there that you do have, for the different places you've worked. But primarily, I'm looking to see what education background do you have? Is that relevant to this? If it's not, keep it short. What work background do you have? And you can also list on your resume projects you've worked on, or anything that's relevant, like, hey, I volunteer at a local coder dojo, or hey, I've given a talk at this local meetup group on this coding topic, or here is a side project I've worked on that is relevant, that, one of my resume projects. And so like being able to show, especially if you don't have any work experience, show that you do have projects that you've completed, open source projects, or just any type of other experience on there. So you have like your professional experience of where you've worked, and then you have your other experience, which is those volunteer things or those talks you've given, or the projects you've completed, especially listing those on there. But the very first thing I look for is what technologies and skills. So it's nice to have those as like a nice bulleted list of items. So I can see, okay, you're familiar with ES6 and Angular and React and Vue, and you've used Sass, and BIM, and you've done responsive web design, and about image optimization, like whatever. Having a list of those skills and technologies and languages and frameworks and libraries or whatever, those relevant things, then that's really useful. And also seeing like, oh, so you have a bunch of really old technologies that no one's used in a decade. That's a red flag. What's going on there? That kind of thing. Like that's really useful to be able to make a quick judgment of the resume.
Okay, so you're saying that the technologies should be showcased as kind of a bulleted list by the languages, frameworks, all the different tools that you know and use.
Yeah.
And then do you think it's important for someone, especially someone who's new in development, to kind of showcase the projects versus the work experience?
Yeah, well, so you've got 3 different gatekeepers when you're trying to get a job. You've got the HR person or the recruiter, and they don't know anything about the technical side of the stuff. They don't know what a jQuery is. They don't know. They look at all those funny nonsense words and just ignore them. And they care about your work experience and can you hold down a job for more than a year. And that's what they care about, and that all of your information is right and that you can use spell check. Then you have the dev manager who actually does understand all of the technical stuff, and they're probably going to end up being your boss. They will review it pretty thoroughly. And then you'll have probably like a senior dev on the team that will look over it, and they're going to give you maybe 5 seconds. So whatever is important on your resume, I hope they can find that in 5 seconds. That's the approach that you need to take for them. So having that bulleted list of technologies, that's really easy for them to parse over very quickly. Having your projects on there and listed in a nice, easy way to read. I think putting on there the name of the project and then like a 1 or 2 sentence summary that makes it sound as impressive as possible. I think that's probably all you really need when it comes to those projects. That will give them something to ask you about during the interview, because they'll say like, oh, I see that you worked on this anonymous image sharing chat room thing. What is that? And then you can talk about that and explain like what technologies you used and what problems you ran into and how you solved those, and kind of go into detail. And especially if it's something that you're passionate about, you know, whatever that happens to be, whatever topic it is, if you build a side project around that topic, be it gardening or cooking or mech robots, whatever, or guitars, you know, whatever you're into, if you do a project around that, then you're going to sound really passionate when you're talking to them in an interview. So that's going to show through. So they're going to be like, I see you have an app for keeping track of what you've planted in your garden. And you're going to go through and talk about, it's a CRUD app and it's using Ruby on Rails, and I used Sass and all this stuff. But you're also going to be talking about your perennials and how your mom uses this app and what feedback she gave you. And like, you're going to sound really passionate about this thing because it's a thing you care about. You know, the stuff the interviewer wants to hear about is the CRUD app stuff. They want to hear about the technologies and approaches, but they also want to hear you be passionate while you're talking about it.
So you're saying it's important to put, of course, your resume projects on your resume, but also maybe 1 or 2 passion projects?
Yeah, passion projects are even better because that shows that you can stay devoted to a project for a lot longer than just a 1 or 2 week period, because usually your passion projects take longer than that. And they're going to be more fleshed out and more polished. So if you have passion projects, you know, put those on there. And I usually try to limit this other experience section to 3 items. Ideally, it's 3 passion projects. But if you have a project that uses the same tech stack that they use, then that's way more important to list that on there. Even if you have 3 really impressive passion projects, but you have a little resume project that is super relevant, then swap out one of those passion projects and put that really relevant thing on there. That's what it comes down to. It's just relevancy of being able to communicate directly to them everything about you that is relevant to the job that you're applying for.
Okay. I know it's also important for developers to have a portfolio in addition to their resume. And there's a lot of overlap there between including contact information, projects, etc. So how is a portfolio different from a resume, and what kinds of projects and information should you display there?
The resume should be really fine-tuned for where you're applying. And if you break it up like I mentioned before, so that you have your tech skills and your other experience, your professional experience and your education in their own little sections, then it becomes a lot easier to update it because you're just moving around some text in a bulleted list so that the list of items is rearranged to be more relevant to the job you're applying for and contain technologies that are more relevant to that one. That should be really fine-tuned. And like, this is a little trick for everybody. Put your name nice and big at the top, and then right under your name or right next to it, put whatever the job title is you're applying for. Because a lot of places use slightly different variations on a job title to mean the same thing, like front-end developer or front-end engineer or UI engineer or whatever. And those are all the same job, that you'd be doing the same work, but they have a slightly different name in their HR system. So that's just a little trick to show them that you customized your resume just for this job application. And that actually goes a pretty long way, surprisingly. But the portfolio side, I see a lot of people kind of stress out about their portfolio and wanting to make it look as amazing as possible and have these crazy interactive designs where stuff flies around the screen. And it's like, that's amazing and that's cool, But that's 3 months of work on your portfolio when you could have done a day on your portfolio and spent 3 months on a cooler project. Because the one thing that you know with absolute certainty about your portfolio is it's going to be outdated in 1 year. It's going to be outdated. You'll have new stuff that you will have completed in that time. You'll be able, after a year, you'll swap a few things out in the portfolio. But after a couple of years, you're going to be looking at it and saying, I need to redo this whole thing. And that's going to happen. Every, 5 years or so, I end up redoing my portfolio site. The important things on there is that the stuff that someone who could hire you, an employer, is going to care about, that needs to be highlighted. So you usually want to have 2 to 4, 3 is the sweet spot, but 2 to 4 spotlighted projects that you want to show off that are nice and front and center. And you don't need this thing to be the coolest, prettiest looking site ever. You don't need to do everything by hand. It's fine to just pull in a template from somewhere and just throw your projects on it. Literally, I got a job at Salesforce and my portfolio was a white page with a bulleted list of blue links, and that was it. And then it's a under construction or something like, at the bottom as an excuse for it being such a terrible site. But it was basically that. It was just a white page with a bulleted list of links. And you know what? That's all it needs to be. Because they don't care about my portfolio site. They care about the portfolio, the actual content in it. So when they click the link and then they go to a new tab, now that's the thing that needs to be cool and impressive. And that's the stuff that they care about. And then I can talk through those different projects as they go down that list. So it doesn't need to be anything crazy. I recommend starting at that point and then maybe turn that bulleted list into a bunch of screenshots. Or don't. It doesn't matter. Or, change the background color. It doesn't need to be crazy. You don't need to do a whole lot. Just have your name, some basic contact information, and you don't need to give them the world on your contact information either. You don't need to say, here's my home address and here's my 4 different ways of calling me on the phone, my cell phone and my work phone, and this is my fax, and this is, my 8 different email addresses and my P.O. box, and no one cares. Just put the forms of contact that you want to be contacted through. If you don't want someone to message you on LinkedIn, don't put LinkedIn on there. They're going to look up LinkedIn anyways. They're going to find that. But just put your phone number and your email address. If you're applying for a place that is in a different region than where you live, you live in New York and you're applying for a job in Los Angeles, then you should put on your resume that you live in New York so that they understand that they can't just call you up later today and say, hey, can you come in 5 minutes? Be like, no, I'm a 4-hour flight from you. So they should know that where your region is if you're applying for a job that is open to remote positions or relocating people. That's when that becomes relevant. But otherwise, people assume that you live in the same city as them, that you're within a 15 to 30 minute drive from the office.
All right, awesome. That was a lot of good information about projects, portfolios. Do you have any final words or anything else that maybe we missed here that you want to talk about?
Yeah, since you have a lot of beginners in your audience or people who are trying to go through a career transition and are learning to code, the best thing you can do is work on projects. You can follow a tutorial, but that tutorial has already had all of the hard parts handled for you. When you actually go and make a project on your own, you're going to run into problems that you need to solve on your own and figure out how to do that. Whereas a tutorial, someone has already solved all those problems and they're just giving you a step-by-step. It's the difference between using a paint by numbers to make your picture and just getting a canvas out and drawing everything from scratch. That's the difference there of now I need to figure out how to draw anatomy appropriately so that the person doesn't look weird. Whereas a paint by numbers, the person's already drawn and you're just coloring it in. That's kind of what the tutorials are for you. It's doing a lot of hand-holding. So the best thing you can do is just work on projects. Start a project, get as far as you can, get it done, go on to the next project. You'll learn so much more in that amount of time, and it'll be way more valuable when you're looking for a job to show that, hey, I'm someone who can actually finish what they start. Here are examples of projects I've finished. Let me talk you through them. That would be my advice, is the best way to learn is to do. So just build a lot of stuff.
Awesome. Do you also have any resources that you would recommend people check out?
Sure. There's an episode of a YouTube channel called Extra Credits that focuses on MVPs. That's kind of where I stole that Mario example from. Yeah. Sorry, no, I stole that one from them. But that's a really good episode to watch in more detail on MVP stuff. There is a good video called Agile Product Management in a Nutshell, I think. Something like that. I'm sure you'll have links below the recording for people. And that's a good talk to kind of see from a bigger project standpoint when you're working with a team, how to organize stuff on a larger scale for a team in a more agile approach. And so that's a good talk to watch as well. There's different, people who have difficulty with motivation, and there's people who have difficulty with perfectionism. And so I've got a few videos as well around those that people can watch. So there's a good talk on someone who spent, I think, like 12 years working on a single project. And then it's a really impressive project. But, the video is him kind of talking about what he learned in that process and why he would never do that again, and be like, this is cool, I'm proud of this, but I also want to make more than like 3 projects in the rest of my life. That's a good talk on like perfectionism. And so, yeah, I'll send a few links to you, and you can put those down below for people who want to see these references.
Yeah, thanks. We'll definitely include those. So if people want to find you, where can they find you online?
Well, I'm on Twitter. So the Jared Wilcurt, TheJaredWilcurt. So at the Jared Wilcurt. And I'm on GitHub. Yeah, those are kind of the main places that you'll find me online, those 2 spots. As mentioned, I do a lot of open source projects. So anytime I'm publishing something new, I will tweet out about it that, hey, here's a new version of this library that I'm maintaining or whatever. You can also go to my own website, my own portfolio, where it lists talks I've given and podcasts I've been on and projects I've completed. And that's thejaredwilcurt.com.
Awesome. I'll definitely include all of that information in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, Jared.
Well, thanks, Gwen. This has been great. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, we'll have you back on real soon. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Faraday Tech Cafe. Don't forget that all of the info and items that were mentioned during the podcast are listed in the show notes for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a positive review on your podcasting platform of choice. For questions or feedback related to the show, you can email us at contact@faradayacademy.com. And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for more great content on a variety of programming topics. Subscribe to the podcast so you can get notified about new episodes that come out every Monday. Until next time.